Marcus Hale had built Novatech solutions from a folding table in his garage. 12 years, 3 failed prototypes, 17 investor rejections, and 1 near bankruptcy that cost him his first marriage. That was the price of the glass tower that now bore his company's name in 6-foot steel letters on the Chicago skyline. He knew every inch of that building. Or at least, he thought he did. It started with an anonymous email. No name, no department, just a subject line: you don't know what's happening inside your own house. Most CEOs would have forwarded it to security and forgotten about it by lunch. Marcus read it 4 times. Because 3 weeks earlier, Novatech's most sensitive client data, a government defense contract worth $42 million, had been quietly leaked to a competitor. The breach was so clean, so surgical, that the FBI cybercrime unit told him it had to be someone on the inside. Someone who knew exactly where to look and exactly how to cover their tracks. Marcus didn't panic. He didn't schedule an emergency board meeting. He didn't fire off angry emails to department heads or summon his legal team at midnight. He did something that nobody in that building, nobody in his entire professional circle, would have ever predicted. He sat in his office on the 42nd floor for a very long time, completely alone, staring at the Chicago skyline as the sun went down, and he made a decision that would change everything. He was going in himself. Not as a CEO. Not as a shareholder. Not as the man whose framed photograph hung in the lobby beside the company's founding mission statement. He was going in as nobody. As a face that meant nothing to anyone. As the one person in the entire building who would be looked straight through without a second glance. Because Marcus understood something after 20 years in business that most executives never learned: people only tell the truth when they believe no one important is listening. He walked into a thrift store on a Tuesday morning, bought a gray work shirt, a pair of worn boots, and a baseball cap he pulled low over his eyes. He told his assistant he'd be unreachable for a week. He made one quiet phone call to arrange a contract placement through a temp staffing agency he'd used years ago for legitimate building maintenance. And on Wednesday at 6:47 a.m., Marcus Hale, CEO, majority shareholder, founder, and the sole reason 460 people had a paycheck, clocked in as a contract janitor named Mike, mop bucket and all, through the same employee entrance the cleaning crew used every single morning. Nobody looked at him twice. That was the first thing that struck him, not with bitterness, but with a sharp, clarifying kind of awareness. He had walked through that lobby 1,000 times and watched people straighten up, smile, reach for their best professional posture. Now he pushed a cart through the same automatic doors and the lobby receptionist didn't lift her eyes from her monitor. A pair of analysts in expensive suits stepped around him without breaking their conversation. A manager he had personally promoted 18 months ago walked past close enough to brush his sleeve and look directly ahead, coffee in hand, completely unseeing. Marcus kept his head down and pushed the cart toward the service corridor. He was invisible. And for the first time in 12 years, that invisibility felt like the most powerful thing he had ever possessed. Because somewhere inside this building, behind one of these polished doors, underneath one of these fluorescent lights, sitting at one of these desks he had paid for, someone had betrayed everything he built. And that person was still here. Still smiling at the right meetings. Still sending the right emails. Still completely certain that a man like Marcus Hale would never get close enough to see what was really happening. They had no idea that he was already inside. They had no idea that he was watching. And they had absolutely no idea what he was about to find out, not in a boardroom, not through an investigation, not through any of the polished, formal systems designed to protect people exactly like them. But in a stairwell. On a Wednesday afternoon. From a 23-year-old intern who refused to stay quiet. The first 2 days taught him things no quarterly report ever could. He learned that the third-floor vending machine had been broken for 6 months and nobody had reported it because people were afraid to seem like they were complaining. He learned that the overnight security guard, a 58-year-old veteran named Gerald, hadn't been given a working radio in 4 months. He learned that two senior managers on the fifth floor routinely left confidential client files sitting unlocked on their desks when they went to lunch, a direct violation of the security protocols Marcus himself had signed into policy. He mopped around those desks with a sick feeling growing in his stomach. But what unsettled him more than the violations, more than the broken equipment and ignored protocols, was something quieter. Something that had no name in any compliance manual he had ever read. It was the atmosphere. The specific, invisible weight that hung over certain floors, certain departments, certain clusters of desks where people sat with their shoulders slightly too tight and their voices slightly too low. Marcus had spent 12 years reading boardrooms. He knew what a healthy team looked like, sounded like, moved like. And what he was walking through on those first 2 days didn't feel like the company he believed he had built. It felt like a company that had learned to perform wellness while quietly suffocating underneath it. He noticed things a CEO was never positioned to notice. The way a junior analyst on the fourth floor flinched slightly every time a certain manager's name appeared on the overhead announcements. The way two women in the compliance department went completely silent when a specific senior colleague entered the break room, not the comfortable silence of people focused on their work, but the practiced, careful silence of people who had learned that speaking freely carried a cost. The way a young project coordinator named Ben ate lunch alone in the stairwell every single day, not because he was antisocial, Marcus would later learn, but because the team lunch culture on his floor operated as a social hierarchy so rigid and so deliberately exclusionary that showing up felt worse than not showing up at all. Marcus cleaned around all of it. He wiped down surfaces and emptied waste bins and refilled paper towel dispensers and said almost nothing to almost anyone. And every evening he went home and sat at his kitchen table and wrote down everything he had seen in a plain notebook with a black pen, the same way he had kept notes in the earliest days of the company when every observation felt urgent and every detail felt like it might matter. It all mattered. That was what he was beginning to understand. Every small thing he had dismissed as operational noise from the 42nd floor was actually a signal. Every unanswered complaint, every broken process, every moment of low-grade fear that people had normalized into their daily routine, none of it had appeared from nowhere. Systems like this didn't build themselves. Cultures like this didn't grow without being fed, without being protected, without someone at a level of authority making the quiet and ongoing decision to let it continue. Someone was shaping this building from the inside. And it wasn't Marcus. By the morning of the third day, he had stopped thinking of this as an investigation into a data breach. It was still that, the $42 million contract, the leaked files, the FBI's confirmation of an inside job, all of that was still the reason he was here, still the thread he was following. But the thread was connected to something larger than a single act of corporate espionage. It was connected to an entire ecosystem that had grown in the space between what Marcus thought his company was and what his company had actually become. He arrived early that Wednesday morning, clocked in through the service entrance, and took the east corridor toward the elevator banks. He had the 7th floor scheduled for the morning shift. He had no particular reason to expect that the 7th floor would be any different from the floors he had already covered. He had no way of knowing that by mid-morning, everything was going to change. He had no way of knowing that in a stairwell, one floor up, a conversation was already beginning, a conversation that one person desperately needed him to hear.